The pod door tore open before I could brace myself, and cold air rushed in like a wave of needles. Hands grabbed me. Not human hands. Long fingers, gray skin, too many joints. I did not fight them. I let them pull me out into the light of a ship I did not recognize, in a part of space I had never seen before, and I said nothing, because saying nothing was the only thing keeping me sane. I had been drifting for 6 days. My ship was gone. My crew was gone. I remembered fire, and silence, and then the pod, and then nothing until now. The soldiers who found me spoke in short clicks and hums, a language my translator implant struggled to catch up with. One of them shoved a scanner against my chest. Another laughed, a wet rattling sound, and said something that made the others laugh too. I did not need the translation to know they were laughing at me. They marched me through corridors lit in pale blue, past windows that showed a fleet of ships shaped like curved blades, hanging in space like a held breath. I counted 40 of them before I stopped counting. This was not a patrol. This was an empire. They brought me to a room with a high ceiling and a floor that looked like polished bone. At the far end, on a raised seat that was trying very hard to look like a throne and mostly succeeding, sat a young woman. If I can call her that. She was not human, but something in the shape of her reminded me of one. Sharp eyes, a proud jaw, silver markings along her cheekbones that seemed to catch every bit of light in the room and throw it back sharper. She wore armor the color of a storm cloud, fitted like a second skin, and she watched me the way a hunter watches something that has already stopped being a threat. Her name, I would learn later, was Ilith Vanu, princess of the Vashtari Empire, daughter of an emperor who had not lost a war in 300 years. She stood up when the guards brought me forward, and she circled me once, slowly, the way you might walk around a piece of furniture you were deciding whether to buy. "This is the creature everyone is so afraid of," she said, and her voice carried easily across the room, meant for the crowd of officers and nobles gathered along the walls. Not for me. This is humanity. Nobody laughed yet. They were waiting to see if she would give them permission. "Bring the diagnostics," she said, and someone did. A thin panel of light showing my vitals, my injuries, the readings from my empty, burned-out pod. She read them the way a soldier reads a battlefield report, quick and cold. Malnourished, dehydrated, no weapon on his person, no weapon in his wreckage, no armor, no implants worth mentioning. She looked up at me, and there was something almost disappointed in her expression, as if she had been hoping for a better show. "The border scouts told my father that your kind fought like devils, that you tore through 3 of our outposts before anyone even saw your ships coming. I expected something more than this." I did not answer. I was still learning how to breathe in that room without giving anything away. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the fine lines etched into her armor, patterns that I would later learn marked her house, her bloodline, 300 years of conquest written into metal. "You won't last," she said, and she said it simply, almost kindly, the way you'd tell a child something true and sad. "A week, maybe less. You have no weapon, no allies, no fleet coming to save you. Whatever you were on your world, here you are nothing. Here you are mine to decide the fate of." I looked at her for a long moment, long enough that one of the guards shifted, uneasy, and reached for something at his belt. "All right," I said, and my voice came out rough, unused. It was the only word I gave her. She tilted her head, surprised, maybe annoyed that I had not begged or threatened or wept, the way I imagined she expected a captured animal to do. Then she waved a hand, bored again, already moving on to something else in her mind. "Put him with the other specimens," she told the guards. "I want him alive for now. Dead things don't answer questions." They dragged me away, and I let them, and I kept my eyes down, and I did not tell her the truth, which was this. She was right that I had no weapon. She was right that no fleet was coming for me. She was right about almost everything except the one thing that mattered. I was not a soldier who had lost his ship. I was the reason the ship was gone at all. The cell they put me in was small, with a single light that never turned off, and a door that hummed faintly with some kind of energy field. I sat on the floor and closed my eyes and let the ship's memory play again, the way it always did when I was still, when there was nothing left to distract me from it. We had been a survey crew, 6 of us, mapping a trade route near the edge of what the star charts called contested space, territory that 3 different empires claimed and none of them controlled. We were not supposed to run into anyone. That was the whole point of the mission. Quiet work, quiet ship, no flags flown. The Vashtari patrol found us anyway. I do not know if it was chance or bad luck or something worse. A leak somewhere in the chain of command that told them exactly where to look. What I know is that they came out of the dark with their curved ships and their long-range weapons, and they did not ask questions, and they did not offer terms. They fired on us before we had even finished raising our hands. I remember Grace Whitfield's voice on the calm even then, giving orders to route power to the shields that were already failing. I remember Oliver Hayne trying to get an emergency signal out, knowing it would never reach anyone in time. I remember the moment the hull breached, the cold, the sudden silence where the ship's hum used to be. And I remember what happened after, though I try very hard not to. Something in me that has always been there, quiet, patient, waiting for exactly this kind of ending, woke up. It always does, eventually. It has a way of finding the worst moments and making them its own. I do not fully understand what I am. I have had a long time to think about it, and I still do not have a clean answer. What I know is that somewhere in my blood, in whatever passes for my soul, there is something old, older than the country I was born in, older maybe than the idea of countries at all. My grandmother used to say, every bloodline carries a debt, and mine carries a strange one. Not a curse exactly, not a gift either. Just a fact, like the color of my eyes. When death comes close to me, it does not leave the way it is supposed to. It stays, it listens, and sometimes, when there is no other way out, it does what I ask. That night, in the wreck of my cruise ship, surrounded by Vashtari soldiers certain of an easy kill, I asked. I do not remember all of what happened next. I remember the soldiers stopping mid-motion, one by one, as if a great hand had reached into the room and simply turned something off inside them. I remember my crewmates' bodies, already gone, already past saving, and the terrible quiet after. I remember setting the ship self-destruct, not because I was ordered to, but because I did not want the Vashtari to have anything left to study, any proof of what they had walked into. I got to an escape pod. I do not remember deciding to. My hands simply did it, on instinct, on whatever is left of the part of me that still wants, foolishly, stubbornly, to keep living. Then 6 days of drifting, and silence, and a slow return to something like myself, until their patrol found me, and brought me here, to this cell, to this empire, to this princess, who looked at me and saw nothing worth fearing. I understood why she thought that. I had made sure of it. Grief and exhaustion had worn every sharp edge off me by the time they pulled me from that pod. I looked like what was left after a storm, not like the storm itself. Let her think I was nothing. Let her think I would not last the week. It would be easier for both of us if she never learned otherwise. The other prisoners in that section of the ship were mostly Vashtari themselves, criminals, or debtors, or soldiers who had failed some mission badly enough to be locked away instead of executed outright. None of them spoke to me at first. I was a curiosity to them too, a strange, soft creature with no scales and no claws, kept in the cell at the end of the row like a specimen in a jar. One of the guards, a broad-shouldered man named Talwyn, took a particular interest in making my first few days difficult. He was not cruel in the dramatic way you might imagine from stories. He was cruel in the small, everyday way, the way people are cruel when they know there will be no consequences. He skipped my meals sometimes, just to watch me go without. He would stand outside my cell and talk about me to the other guards as if I could not understand a word, though by then my translator had caught up enough that I understood most of it. I let it happen. I told myself it did not matter. I had lived through worse in the days right after losing my crew, and a little hunger, a little humiliation, was nothing next to that. But there is a thing about what I carry inside me that I have never been able to fully control, no matter how many years I have had to practice. It notices cruelty. It keeps track, in its own quiet way, of who has done harm and who has not, and it does not always wait for my permission before it acts. On my fourth night in that cell, Talwyn did not report for his next shift. They found him 2 corridors away, slumped against a maintenance panel, with no mark on him at all. The ship's medical scanners could not explain it. His heart had simply stopped, cleanly, the way a candle goes out when the last of the wax is gone, except he had been a young, healthy man with no history of illness. I heard the guards talking about it the next morning, low voices, uneasy. One of them mentioned that Talwyn had been the one assigned to my cell block. Another one laughed it off, said it was surely nothing, said things like that just happened sometimes on long deployments, bodies wearing out under stress no one sees coming. I sat very still in my cell and said nothing, and felt, somewhere deep in my chest, a small and terrible relief that I did not examine too closely. It was around that time that Eilith started visiting. She did not come often, and she never announced it as anything important. She would simply appear outside my cell, sometimes with an advisor trailing behind her, an older man named Raxel Doran, who watched me with more suspicion than curiosity, and sometimes alone, arms crossed, studying me the way she might study a puzzle she was annoyed at herself for not solving yet. "You still haven't told anyone your name," she said, on one of those visits, several days after the incident with Talwyn. "You never asked," I said. That seemed to catch her off guard. She frowned, as if she was recalculating something. "Fine. What is it?" "Ethan," I said. "Ethan Calder." She repeated it slowly, like she was testing the shape of it in her mouth, unfamiliar and clumsy. Then she asked me questions, one after another, about my ship, my crew, my world, the things humans were supposedly capable of that had made her father's scouts so nervous. I answered most of them honestly, or honestly enough. I told her about Earth, about oceans and cities, and the ordinary shape of a life before all of this. I did not tell her what had happened to my crew, or what I had done in the last hour of that ship's life, or what I truly was underneath the tired, quiet man she saw in front of her. She was sharp. I could see it in the way she listened, the way she caught the small gaps in my answers, and circled back to them later, testing whether my story stayed the same. I had the sense, even then, in those early days, that she was smarter than her court gave her credit for, and that being underestimated by her own people had made her patient in a way most royalty never learns to be. "You're strange," she told me once, near the end of one of those visits. "Everyone said your kind were monsters, vicious, unpredictable. You're just sad." I almost laughed at that, almost. "Maybe I'm both," I said. She studied me for a long moment, something flickering behind her eyes that I could not name yet, and then she turned and left without another word, and I sat alone in the blue light of my cell and wondered, for the first time since I had woken up in that pod, whether I was going to be able to keep my secret for very much longer. 3 weeks passed before anything changed in a way I could not ignore. I had settled, as much as a prisoner can settle, into a strange rhythm. Meals came on time now, though I never learned who had given that order. My cell stayed the same, small and blue-lit, but the guards assigned to my block had grown careful around me in a way that had nothing to do with fear of what I could do, and everything to do with quiet respect for the fact that the princess visited me more often than she visited anyone else on the ship. Word travels fast in a place like that. I heard the whispers even through the walls. Some said I was being kept as a pet, a curiosity for Eilith's amusement. Others said I was being studied for weaknesses, that the Empire meant to use whatever they learned from me to break the rest of humanity faster than expected. A few, the quieter ones, said something closer to the truth without knowing it, that there was something about me that made even seasoned soldiers uneasy, though none of them could say exactly what. Ilith's visits had changed too. She no longer came with a guard trailing behind her, and she no longer asked her questions like a commander gathering intelligence. She asked them like someone who was, against her own better judgment, curious about the person in front of her rather than the specimen. "Tell me about your mother," she said one evening, sitting on the floor outside my cell with her back against the wall, an unusual posture for someone raised to sit on thrones. "She raised bees," I said, "real ones, in wooden boxes, in a small yard behind our house. She used to say they were the only creatures on Earth that understood the value of working together without needing anyone to tell them how." Ilith was quiet for a moment. "We don't have anything like that here. Every insect in the Empire has been engineered for some purpose. Nothing is left to just exist the way you're describing." "That sounds lonely," I said, before I could stop myself. She looked at me sharply, and I thought for a moment I had overstepped, said something a prisoner should not say to a princess. But instead of anger, something softer crossed her face, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. "It is," she admitted, and then, as if embarrassed by the admission, she stood and left without saying anything further. It was around this time that the second death happened. A trader named Corvin Alsk, a small, oily man who dealt in illegal goods along the fringes of Vashtari space, had come aboard the outpost under some official pretext, though everyone knew his real business was buying and selling anything valuable enough to be worth the risk. He had heard about me, the human specimen kept in the royal wing, and he had made inquiries about purchasing my remains, or pieces of them, for research buyers who paid well for exotic biology. I did not know about this arrangement until after it had already fallen apart in the worst possible way. Corvin Alsk disappeared 3 days after making his offer. No struggle, no distress call, nothing but an empty cabin and a half-finished meal left cooling on a table. The outpost's security team searched every corridor and cargo bay they could think of, and found nothing, not a trace of him, not even the faintest clue as to where he might have gone. I felt it happen, the way you feel a storm coming before the first raindrop falls, a kind of pressure behind my ribs, a pull, gone almost as soon as it arrived. I did not celebrate it. I have never once celebrated what happens when that part of me decides someone deserves an ending. I simply sat in my cell and felt the familiar ache that always follows, the tiredness that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long, and I said nothing to anyone. Raxel Doran, the advisor who distrusted me more with each passing week, was the one who finally connected the pattern out loud. I heard him arguing with Ilith outside my cell one night, their voices low but sharp enough to carry. 2 deaths, Highness. 2, in the span of a month, both connected to this creature. Talwyn mistreated him and died within days. Now the trader who wanted to sell his remains vanishes without a trace. You cannot keep dismissing this as coincidence. And what would you have me do, Raxel? He hasn't left that cell once. Every guard on this deck can confirm it. Whatever is happening, it isn't him pulling a blade in the dark. I did not say it was a blade, Raxel said, and his voice dropped lower still, careful, deliberate. I have read the old accounts, the ones from before your father's time, about certain species said to carry something with them, not a weapon they hold, a weapon they are. There was a long silence after that. You think he's some kind of curse, Ilith said finally, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice, though it was thinner than it had been a month ago. I think, Raxel said carefully, that you should stop visiting him alone. She did not answer that directly. I heard her footsteps move away instead, quick and hard against the floor, and I sat in the dark of my cell, wondering how much longer the truth could stay buried before it climbed out on its own, whether I wanted it to or not. She did not stop visiting. If anything, the conversation with Raxel seemed to sharpen her curiosity rather than dull it. She came the very next evening, and the one after that, and though she was more careful with her questions now, watching my reactions more closely, she did not stay away. Do you know why people are dying around you? She asked me directly, one night. No preamble, no warm-up. It was the kind of question meant to catch a liar off guard. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I have a guess. Share it. There are things in this universe, I said slowly, choosing each word the way you choose a foothold on unstable ground, that don't announce themselves. Some people carry more than they seem to. I think, maybe, I'm one of them. That's not an answer, Ethan. It's the only one I have right now, I said, and it was true, in its own careful way. I was not ready to hand her the whole truth. I did not know yet if I trusted her with it, or if trusting her with it would be a kindness or a cruelty. I had learned, over a very long life, that the truth about what I am rarely makes anything easier for the people who hear it. She studied me with an expression I had started to recognize, the look of someone doing complicated math in their head and not liking any of the answers they were arriving at. My father is coming to the outpost in 2 weeks, she said, instead of pressing further. There's a ceremony, an inspection of the border territories, and he wants to see the specimens gathered here for himself, including you. Something cold moved through me at that. An emperor who had not lost a war in 300 years, coming to look me over the way his daughter had once looked me over, except with none of the strange, reluctant kindness that had grown between us in the weeks since. What happens if he doesn't like what he sees? I asked. Ilith's jaw tightened. Then he decides what to do with you, and I won't have any say in it. We sat with that for a while, the two of us, on opposite sides of a wall that no longer felt as solid as it once had. Can I ask you something? I said finally. She nodded. Why do you keep coming here? You have an empire to help run, a father to answer to, advisors telling you this is a mistake. Why spend your evenings talking to a prisoner who won't even tell you the whole truth about himself? She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she might not answer at all. Because everyone else in my life talks to me like I'm already emperor, she said finally, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Like every word out of my mouth is a decree, every silence a judgment. You're the only person who has ever just talked to me, like a person, even locked in a cell, even with soldiers a shout away. You never once bowed your head or flattered me, or pretended I was something more than what I am. What are you? I asked, gently. Someone who is tired, she said, of being told what I'm supposed to become before I've had the chance to decide it for myself. I understood that more than she knew. I had spent centuries being told what I was supposed to be by the thing living quietly inside my own blood, and I had spent just as long trying to decide, again and again, whether I would let it define me or not. For what it's worth, I said, I don't think you're what your advisors think you are either. She looked at me then, really looked, in a way that made me suddenly, sharply aware of how long it had been since anyone had looked at me like I was worth understanding rather than using. What do you think I am? She asked. Someone who could be better than the empire that raised her, I said. If she's given the chance. She did not answer that. She simply sat with me a while longer, in comfortable silence this time, until the ship's lights dimmed for the night cycle, and she rose to leave, pausing at the edge of my cell to look back at me one more time. 2 weeks, she reminded me, as if I could have forgotten. Try not to give my father a reason to end this quietly, Ethan. I promised her I would try. I did not tell her that quiet endings were the only kind I truly knew how to give when the moment finally demanded them, and that if her father pushed hard enough, it would not be my ending that came quietly at all. The 2 weeks that followed passed the way the last hours before a storm always pass, too slow and too fast at once. I watched the outpost prepare for the Emperor's arrival, watched extra guards move through the corridors, watched Raxil Doran grow more watchful, more openly suspicious, as if he could sense the same pressure building that I could feel gathering quietly in my own chest. I did not know yet that the storm would not come from the Emperor at all. I did not know that it would come first from a rival house, hungry for a prize that was never truly theirs to take, and that when it arrived, it would drag both Ilith and me into the open in a way that would make every careful secret I had kept for weeks impossible to hold on to any longer. But that is a part of the story that had not happened yet. For those 2 weeks, all I knew was this: a princess who was supposed to see me as nothing had started, slowly, and without either of us quite admitting it, to see me as someone. And somewhere in the quiet space between her visits, I had started, against every careful instinct I had built over centuries of loss, to hope that maybe, this time, being seen would not end the way it always had before. The attack came on the 9th night, 6 days before the Emperor's fleet was due to arrive, and it came the way the worst things always come, without warning, in the middle of an hour, when everyone had let their guard down just enough to matter. I was asleep, or close to it, when the first alarm sounded. It was not the outpost's general alert, the one used for drills and minor equipment failures. This was a sharper tone, one that made the guards outside my cell go from relaxed to rigid in an instant, hands moving to weapons before their minds had fully caught up. "Breach," one of them said into his comm, voice tight. "Deck 7, multiple hostiles." This isn't a drill. I sat up in the dark of my cell and listened to the outpost come apart around me. The Voss house had been circling Ilith's position for longer than I understood at the time. I learned the details later, in pieces, from things Ilith told me and things I overheard in the chaos that followed. Lord Kestrick Voss led a smaller but ambitious house within the Empire, one that had spent years watching the royal family's grip on power and looking for any crack wide enough to exploit. My capture, and the strange rumors that had grown up around it, had given him exactly the opening he needed. If he could seize the human specimen everyone was whispering about, present it to the Emperor himself as a trophy his own house had claimed, he could embarrass Ilith publicly, weaken her standing before her father's inspection even began, and strengthen his own house's claim to influence in one bold move. He had planned it carefully. A small strike team, disguised as a maintenance crew, slipping past the outpost's outer defenses, under cover of a routine supply docking. By the time anyone realized what was happening, they were already deep inside, moving fast, cutting through resistance with a brutal efficiency that spoke of long practice. I heard the fighting before I saw any of it, the sound of weapons fire echoing through the corridors, shouted orders, the particular chaos of a well-planned ambush unfolding exactly as intended. My cell door, still humming with its energy field, suddenly went dark and silent, and I realized someone had cut power to that section of the ship on purpose. The door slid open a moment later, and instead of Voss soldiers coming to collect their prize, it was Ilith who stood there, breathing hard, a weapon in her hand that looked like it had seen more use in the last 10 minutes than in the rest of her life combined. "Move," she said. No explanation, no time for one. Now. I did not argue. I followed her out into a corridor lit by flashing emergency lights, the air already sharp with the smell of scorched metal. "What's happening?" I asked, keeping close behind her as she led us through a side passage, away from the sound of the fighting. "Voss," she said, the name coming out like a curse. "He's after you, or he's using you as an excuse to get to me. I'm honestly not sure which anymore, and right now it doesn't matter." We made it 3 more corridors before our luck ran out. They came from both directions at once, 6 soldiers in Voss house colors, weapons already raised, faces set with the particular calm of people who believe they have already won. Ilith pushed me behind her without thinking, raising her own weapon, and for one terrible moment, I understood that she meant to stand between me and 6 armed soldiers, with nothing but a single weapon and whatever courage she had left. "Don't," I said quietly. "Now is not the time to argue with me, Ethan." "I'm not arguing," I said. "I'm asking you to trust me." She glanced back at me, confusion and fear and something else, something that looked almost like recognition, flickering across her face, as if some part of her had already begun to suspect what I was about to show her and simply hadn't let herself believe it yet. The lead soldier gave an order, and the others began to close in, and I felt the old familiar pressure rise up inside my chest, the thing that had been quiet for weeks, patient, waiting, the way it always waits, for exactly this kind of moment. I stepped past Ilith. I do not remember every detail of what happened next, the way I never fully remember these moments, as if some part of me deliberately looks away even while the rest of me does what must be done. I remember the soldiers' confidence faltering as I moved toward them without any weapon in my hands, without any visible reason for the calm on my face. I remember the first one stopping mid-stride, weapons slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers, eyes going wide with a fear that had nothing to do with anything he could see. I remember Ilith's sharp intake of breath behind me. One by one, the 6 soldiers went still, the way a candle flame goes still in a room with no wind, and then, one by one, they simply stopped. No blood, no violence in the way the word usually means. Just an ending, quiet and complete, delivered by something in me that has never needed weapons to do what weapons are built for. When it was over, I stood in a corridor with 6 bodies around me, and I turned to look at Ilith, and I watched the last of my careful secret crumble apart in her eyes. She did not scream, she did not run, she stood very still, weapon still raised though her hand had begun to shake, and she looked at me the way you look at something you thought you understood completely, and suddenly realize you never understood at all. "What are you?" she said, and it was not a question this time. It was something closer to a demand, and beneath the demand, something rawer, something almost like grief, for the version of me she had thought she knew. "Later," I said. "I promise you an answer, but right now we need to move, because Voss will have heard what happened here, and he won't send only 6 men a second time." She hesitated one more moment, and then, to my surprise, she nodded, and we ran. The rest of that night blurred into a series of narrow escapes and close corridors, the outpost's defenses finally rallying enough to push back against the Voss incursion, though not before more damage had been done than anyone wanted to admit. We found ourselves cornered twice more before the fighting finally began to turn in the outpost's favor, and both times I did what needed to be done, and both times Ilith watched and said nothing and did not look away. Lord Kestrick Voss himself was captured near dawn, trying to retreat to his own ship with what remained of his strike force, and the moment his capture was confirmed, the fighting stopped entirely, the way a storm sometimes ends all at once instead of fading slowly. Ilith and I ended up in a small maintenance room near the outpost's core, waiting for the all-clear, both of us bruised and exhausted and covered in the kind of dust that settles after violence, though neither of us had a mark of injury on our skin. She sat across from me, weapon finally lowered, and for a long time neither of us said anything at all. "You could have done that from the moment they put you in that cell," she said finally, "couldn't you? Any of the guards, any of the nights Talwyn made your life difficult, any of it. You could have ended it all in a moment." "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, and found, for once, that I wanted to. Because it's not something I get to use lightly. Every time it happens, it costs me something. And because for a long time, I thought maybe if I stayed quiet enough, stayed harmless enough, I could just survive here, without anyone finding out, without anyone getting hurt on my account. "That's not really an answer either," she said, but there was no anger in it now, only exhaustion, and underneath the exhaustion, something like understanding. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She looked at me for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a short, tired, disbelieving sound. "My father is arriving in 6 days to inspect a harmless human specimen, and instead I'm going to have to explain that the specimen just quietly ended 6 of Lord Voss's best soldiers without lifting a hand. I could go back to being harmless," I offered, and I meant it as something close to a joke, though neither of us quite managed to smile at it. "No," she said, more serious now. "No, I don't think you could, and I don't think I want you to, not anymore. Whatever you did tonight, whatever you are, you didn't do it for yourself. You did it to keep me alive." "I did," I admitted. "Why?" I did not have a clean answer for that either, not one I was ready to say out loud, though the shape of it had been forming quietly in me for weeks, ever since a princess who was supposed to see me as nothing had started asking about my mother's bees instead of my crew's weapons. Because somewhere in the last few weeks, I said carefully, you stopped being someone I was hiding from and started being someone I was trying to protect. She held my gaze for a long moment, something soft and startled moving behind her eyes, and then the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside pulled us both back to the reality of where we were, an outpost still smoking from an attempted coup, an emperor arriving in 6 days, and a secret that could no longer be kept quiet, no matter how much either of us might have wanted it to be. "They're going to ask what happened tonight," she said, standing, straightening her armor with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "Raxel is going to ask. My father's advisors are going to ask. And I don't know yet what I'm going to tell them." "Tell them the truth," I said. "It's the only thing I have left to give you that's worth anything." She nodded slowly, though I could see the weight of what that truth would mean settling onto her shoulders, even as she accepted it, the beginning of a choice she had not yet fully made, between the empire that had raised her and the strange, quiet thing standing in front of her that had just saved her life without asking for anything in return. We stepped out of that maintenance room together, into a corridor full of soldiers and smoke, and the aftermath of a night neither of us would ever fully explain the same way twice, and somewhere behind us, in a cell that no longer meant anything, the careful lie I had been living for weeks lay in pieces, and neither of us reached down to pick it back up. They gave me a proper room after that night, not a cell, though the guards posted outside it made it clear the change was a courtesy, not a release. Ilith came to me the following evening, alone, and this time she did not sit outside a barrier to talk to me. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from me with the direct, unflinching look of someone who had spent a full day deciding she was done accepting half answers. "Tell me everything," she said. "Not the careful version, not the version you think I can handle. Everything." So I did. I told her about my grandmother first, because it was easier to start with a person than with a truth too large to hold all at once. I told her how she used to sit with me on the porch of our house when I was young, long before I understood what she was trying to warn me about, and tell me stories about our family that sounded, at the time, like folklore, like the kind of thing grandparents tell children to make bedtime feel less ordinary. She used to say, "Every family carries something," I said, "a weight, an inheritance, something passed down whether you want it or not. For most families, it's small things, a temper, a talent for music, a tendency toward stubbornness. For mine, it was something else." "What was it?" Ilith asked, quiet, careful, giving me the space to find the words at my own pace. "There was a war, a very long time ago, back on Earth, before written history even really began in the way we understand it now. I don't know all the details, because even my grandmother didn't know all the details. It had been passed down and reshaped so many times by then that the truth and the legend had become impossible to fully separate. What I do know is that something happened during that war, something that changed a single bloodline, mine, in a way that never fully went away. Changed it how? I chose my next words as carefully as I had ever chosen anything. There is a part of me that is not entirely mine. It has been passed down through every generation since that war, sleeping most of the time, waking only when the person carrying it is pushed to the very edge of survival. It does not think the way I think. It does not feel the way I feel. It only knows one purpose, and it has never once failed to carry that purpose out. Death, Ilith said quietly, the word landing between us like something too heavy to lift back up once it had been set down. Yes, I said. Not death like a storyteller's monster, waiting in shadows to frighten children. Something older and quieter than that. Something that simply ends what needs to end, when it is asked, or sometimes, when it decides for itself that the asking has already happened, even if I never said the words out loud. Ilith was quiet for a long moment, processing, and I let her have the silence, because I understood, better than almost anyone, how much a truth like that needed room to settle before it could be answered. Is that what happened on your ship? She said finally. The one you lost, before we found you. I nodded, and for the first time since it had happened, I let myself say the whole of it out loud, to another living person, instead of carrying it silently the way I had carried it for weeks. My crew were not soldiers, I said. We were surveyors, mapping quiet routes, staying away from anything that looked like a fight. Your father's patrol found us anyway, and they didn't ask questions before they opened fire. So I watched 5 people I cared about die in the space of a few minutes, and when the soldiers who did it came to finish the job, something in me woke up that I had spent years hoping would stay asleep forever. And it ended them, she said. All of them, I said. Every soldier on that patrol. I didn't count how many. I try very hard, most days, not to count. She absorbed that for a long moment, and I watched her carefully, waiting for the fear to return to her eyes, the way it had, briefly, in the corridor after Voss's soldiers fell. But it did not come, not the way I expected. What came instead was something closer to grief, an understanding settling slowly into place. That's why you were so quiet when they brought you in, she said. Why you never fought back, never tried to escape. You weren't broken, you were grieving. Both, maybe, I admitted. It's hard to separate them sometimes. And the guard, Talwyn, the traitor who wanted to sell you, Voss's soldiers in the corridor, all of it, it's the same thing. The same part of you, deciding who deserves an ending. Yes, I said, though I want you to understand something important, because it's the part people usually get wrong when they finally learn the truth about what I carry. It doesn't act on cruelty alone. It's not some blunt instrument that punishes every small unkindness in the universe. It waits for real threat, real danger, moments where there's no other way through. Talwyn was cruel to me, but I never asked for what happened to him, and I've spent every night since wondering if I could have stopped it if I'd tried harder. The traitor wanted to sell pieces of me to people who would have done far worse than sell, and even then, I didn't ask for that ending. It simply came, the way weather comes, without waiting for permission. But last night, she said slowly, in the corridor, with Voss's men, that one you did ask for. That one I asked for, I agreed, because it was you standing between me and 6 armed soldiers, and I decided, in that moment, that I would rather carry the cost of what happens after than let anything happen to you. She looked away from me then, out toward the small window in the corner of the room, and when she spoke again, her voice had grown smaller, more uncertain than I had ever heard it. What does it cost you? She asked. You said it before, in the maintenance room, that it costs you something every time. What does that mean? I hesitated, because this was the part I had never told anyone, not even the few people back on Earth who had known the truth about my family's inheritance. Every time it acts, I said slowly, it takes something from me in return. Not visibly, not in a way a scanner could measure, but I feel older after, every single time, in a way that has nothing to do with the passing of ordinary years. I have lived a very long time, Eilith, longer than you'd believe if I told you the number. And I am not entirely certain how much longer I have left before whatever is inside me finishes taking what it's owed and leaves nothing of me behind at all. The room went very quiet after that. How long, she asked, have you been carrying this? Since before your empire had a name, I said, and watched the weight of that number settle into her expression, disbelief and something like awe moving across her face in slow motion. I don't age the way your kind, or my own kind, normally does. I have watched empires rise and fall on my own world, watched entire civilizations come and go, and every time, eventually, the losses pile up high enough that whatever is inside me wakes up again and does what it does, and I move on, alone, because there is no one left from the world I started in who remembers who I used to be before any of this began. You've been alone that whole time, she said, and it was not a question. Mostly, I said. It's easier that way, safer, for the people around me. I learned a long time ago that caring about someone, letting them get close, only ever ends one of two ways. Either I lose them, the way I lose everyone eventually, to time or war or simple bad luck. Or they learn what I am, and they look at me the way people always look at me once they know, like I'm something to fear instead of someone to know. I'm not looking at you like that, she said quietly. I noticed, I said, and something in my chest, old and tired and unused to hope, allowed itself, cautiously, to feel something close to relief. She was quiet for a long time after that, turning the whole of it over in her mind, and I let her, because there was nothing more I could say that would make the truth easier to hold. Finally, she looked back at me, and her expression had settled into something steadier than I expected, something that looked, unmistakably, like a decision being made. My father arrives in 5 days, she said. When he does, he's going to want to know exactly what you are. Raxil already suspects. It won't take much for the truth to reach the Emperor's ears, one way or another, whether it comes from you or from someone else entirely. I know, I said. And when he learns it, she continued, he isn't going to see a person the way I've started to. He's going to see a weapon. The single greatest weapon our empire could ever hope to claim, born from a bloodline he can't replicate, obedient enough, he'll assume, to be pointed at whatever enemy stands in our way next. I won't be pointed at anyone, I said, and I meant it with a certainty that surprised even me. I believe you, she said, but belief won't stop him from trying, and if you refuse him, if you make it clear you can't be controlled the way he wants, he won't hesitate to decide that a weapon he can't use is a weapon too dangerous to leave standing. The room fell silent again, the two of us sitting with the shape of what was coming, 5 days away and closing fast, an emperor who had never lost a war, arriving to claim or destroy the thing sitting quietly across from his daughter. What do we do? I asked, finally, because for the first time since I had woken up in that pod 6 weeks ago, I found myself thinking in terms of we, instead of simply I, and the shift startled me, even as I said it out loud. Ilith met my eyes, and there was fear in her expression, real fear, for the first time since she had learned the truth, but underneath it, something harder, something that reminded me, suddenly and sharply, of the young woman who had once stood over me in a throne room and promised, with total confidence, that I would not last a week. We decide, she said, what kind of empire I'm actually willing to inherit, and we find out, together, whether my father is willing to accept an answer he doesn't like. I did not know, in that moment, whether we were about to survive what was coming, or simply choose, together, the manner in which we finally fell. But for the first time since the fire on my ship had taken everything else from me, I found that I was not facing it alone, and something in that simple fact felt, against every hard lesson centuries of loss had taught me, worth holding on to. The Emperor's fleet arrived on the 5th day exactly as scheduled, and the outpost that had felt like a small, contained world for 6 weeks suddenly felt very small indeed, dwarfed by the arrival of ships that made even the curved blades of the local patrol look like children's toys by comparison. Emperor Dravith Vanu did not waste time on ceremony. He came aboard the outpost within hours of docking, flanked by a personal guard whose armor gleamed like polished obsidian, and he made his way directly to the chamber where Ilith and I had been asked, formally, coldly, to wait for him. He was tall, taller than Ilith, with the same sharp eyes and proud jaw, though centuries of rule had carved something harder into his expression than the version I had come to know in his daughter. He looked at me the way a general looks at a battlefield, calculating, already 3 moves ahead. So, he said, his voice filling the room without needing to be raised, this is the human my daughter has been so carefully protecting. Father, Ilith began, but he raised a hand, and she fell silent, the old habits of a lifetime under his rule surfacing even now. Raxil has told me everything, the Emperor continued, circling me the way Ilith once had, though there was none of her curiosity in it, only cold assessment. Guards dying without cause, a traitor vanishing without a trace, 6 of Lord Voss's soldiers ended in a single corridor without a single mark of violence on their bodies. And my daughter, keeping all of it quiet, protecting a creature she should have reported the moment the pattern became clear. I was protecting him because he was protecting me, Ilith said, finding her voice again, steadier now. Voss's men would have killed us both if Ethan hadn't done what he did. And what exactly did he do? The Emperor asked, turning his full attention back to me. My daughter's reports are frustratingly vague on that point. Tell me yourself, human, what are you? I looked at Ilith, and she gave me the smallest of nods, and I understood that the time for careful half-truths had finally, completely run out. I am what's left, I said, of an old bloodline that carries something most species only tell stories about. When death becomes unavoidable, when there is no other way through, it comes to me and I am able to give it a direction. That's what happened to your patrol that destroyed my crew's ship. That's what happened to your soldier who mistreated me, and the traitor who wanted to sell pieces of me, and Lord Voss's men in that corridor. I did not choose most of those endings, but I would choose every single one of them again, without hesitation, if it meant keeping your daughter alive. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that reminded me, uncomfortably, of a man doing sums in his head, weighing costs and benefits, with no room left for anything as inconvenient as compassion. "Do you understand what you are describing?" he said finally. "A weapon capable of ending soldiers without a single shot fired, without warning, without any defense your enemy could hope to raise against it. Do you have any concept of what an empire could accomplish, with a weapon like that, pointed in the right direction?" "I am not a weapon to be pointed," I said. "I am a person who carries something heavy, and I decide, every single time, whether the weight is worth lifting. I will not be your soldier, Emperor. I will not conquer worlds on your behalf, or end lives because your ambitions require it." Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Then you are of no use to me alive, and considerably too dangerous to leave breathing." "Father," Ilith said, stepping forward, placing herself, deliberately, between the Emperor and me, the same way I had once placed myself between her and Voss's soldiers. "If you move against him, you will be moving against me as well." The Emperor's gaze snapped to his daughter, surprise flickering briefly across his controlled features before hardening again into something colder. "Careful, Ilith. You are speaking as though you have already chosen a side in a war you don't yet understand." "I understand it perfectly," she said. "I understand that you want to use him the way you use everything and everyone in this empire, as a tool to be pointed at whatever stands between you and more power. And I understand that he has never once, in 6 weeks, given me a single reason to fear him, while you have given me a lifetime of reasons to fear exactly what you're capable of when something valuable refuses to bend to your will." The room went utterly silent, the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks beyond repair. "You would choose him," the Emperor said slowly, "over your own house, over your own future as Empress." "I would choose," Ilith said, her voice steady despite the danger written plainly across her father's face, "an empire that doesn't measure every living thing by how useful it can be made to someone else's ambition." "If that means choosing him, then yes, Father, I choose him." The Emperor's expression settled into something final, something that made the guards flanking him shift, hands drifting toward their weapons. "Then I have no daughter standing before me," he said, "only an obstacle." He gave the order without raising his voice, a simple gesture of his hand, and the room filled, in an instant, with soldiers pouring in from every entrance, weapons raised, faces set with the grim readiness of men who had been briefed, ahead of time, on exactly what might be required of them. I felt the old, familiar pressure rise in my chest, faster and stronger than it ever had before, and this time, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not try to hold it back. "Get behind me," I told Ilith, and this time she did not argue, did not try to place herself between me and the danger the way she once had. She understood, now, what I was, and she trusted, completely, what that meant for the moment in front of us. What happened next is the part of this story I have the least words for, even now, even having lived through centuries of moments that stretched language past its limits. The soldiers who advanced on us did not fall to blades or bullets or any weapon their training had prepared them to defend against. They simply stopped, one by one, the way every threat I have ever faced has eventually stopped, quietly, completely, without cruelty and without mercy, only the simple, terrible certainty of an ending that had already been decided the moment they chose to raise their weapons against the woman standing behind me. The Emperor's personal guard fell first, then the soldiers who had poured in through the side entrances, until the room stood empty of every threat except the Emperor himself, standing alone now, his obsidian-armored guard gone still and silent around his feet, his face, for the first time since he had walked into that chamber, showing something other than cold calculation. Fear. You cannot win a war against your own daughter and expect me to stand aside, I told him, my voice quieter than I expected it to be, exhausted already from what had just happened, but steady. I am not asking you to love her the way she deserves. I am asking you to leave this room, return to your fleet, and never again mistake either of us for something you're entitled to use. The Emperor looked around at the silent, fallen shapes of his own soldiers, and something in his proud, ancient certainty finally, visibly, cracked. This isn't over, he said, though the words carried none of the weight they might have carried an hour earlier. An empire does not simply forgive a challenge like this one. Then it won't be forgiven, Ileth said, stepping up beside me now, no longer sheltering behind me but standing with me, the two of us facing her father together. But it will be remembered as the day I chose to build something better than what you built, father, with or without your blessing. The Emperor left the outpost within the hour, his remaining forces withdrawing in a silence heavier than any battle could have left behind. He did not attempt to reclaim the throne he had briefly threatened to strip from his daughter, whether that was mercy, calculation, or simple fear of what I had shown him that day, I never fully learned, and I am not certain it mattered which one it was. What mattered was what came after. Ileth took her place as Empress far sooner than tradition or expectation had ever planned for, in the confused, uncertain months that followed her father's retreat, and she did not build the empire he had wanted her to inherit. She began, slowly, carefully, the long, unglamorous work of building something else instead, an empire that did not measure the worth of every living thing by how useful it could be made to someone else's ambition, the kind of empire she had once told me, quietly, in the dark of a cell, she was tired of being told to become before she had the chance to choose it herself. I stayed, not as a weapon kept in reserve for the next crisis, not as a specimen studied for whatever secrets my blood might still hold, but as something I had not been in longer than I could remember. A person allowed to simply exist beside someone who had chosen, with full knowledge of what I carried, to stand next to me anyway. There is a particular evening I return to, in my memory, more often than any other from that strange, unlikely chapter of my long life. Ileth and I stood together on a viewing deck, overlooking the same stars that had once carried the wreckage of my crew's ship into the dark, and she turned to me, unprompted, with a small, tired smile that reminded me, briefly and painfully, of the proud, certain young woman who had once circled me in a throne room like a purchase she was still deciding on. "You won't last," she said, and for a moment, old instinct flinched in me, expecting the threat that phrase had once carried. But her smile only widened, gentle now, entirely without cruelty. "Not like this," she continued, "not carrying all of it alone, the way you have for centuries. I intend to make sure of that, Ethan Calder, whether you ask for the help or not." I looked out at the stars with her, at the quiet dark that had once held nothing for me but loss, and for the first time in longer than I could measure, I let myself believe her. She was right, in the end, though not in the way she had first meant it, standing over a broken, silent prisoner all those weeks ago. I would not last, not the way I had before, alone, carrying an old and heavy inheritance through centuries with no one beside me to share its weight. I would last differently now, together with someone who had looked directly at the thing living inside me and chosen, with open eyes to stay anyway.